You. I've been going on vacations for years and years and years. I've been to Utah, Wyoming, Texas, Illinois, Indiana, and I usually tell people I'm going to national parks, state parks, storytelling festivals, and such. But really, that's not what I've been up to. I've been Bigfoot hunting. And until now, I didn't want to tell anybody because I thought that they would think I was crazy. But now that I'm 44, I don't really care. And some people had already figured out that I was crazy. Well, you might wonder, how does one become a Bigfoot hunter? And it really goes back 4 generations, back to my great grandpa who was the first Bigfoot hunter in the family. And since then, every single male relative, has found a Bigfoot and been able to take its picture, except me. And there's even out in the woods a cabin where they hang up all of the pictures of the Bigfoot. Well, my mom says that she now has to tell you a secret that I'm not allowed to know. So I'm going to hand the mic over to her for a minute. Well, now, my son has been telling you stories already. I can tell it. I mean, he probably even told you that every male in his family has seen Bigfoot and taken the picture of it. Well, I'm here to tell you that simply is not true. You see, the wives get tired of the men going out and looking for Bigfoot, so eventually they put on the costume and they go out in the woods so the husbands can take the picture with Bigfoot. Now, by the time it got to Alan's grandma, the costume was completely worn out, so she convinced Alan's grandpa to put shag carpeting all over the house, and she made sure there was some left over, and she made a costume for herself out of that shag carpeting. And that is the reason that they all have pictures of Bigfoot to this day. Except my son, you see, he is still single. He has not gotten married in a long time. And so if he does not get married, he never will get his picture with Bigfoot. Well, I better hand it back to my son now. Thank you for listening to me. Well, I hope my mom didn't tell you anything too embarrassing, but let's continue. You see, I have never in my days been able to take a picture of Bigfoot. And for a while, I was starting to believe that maybe Bigfoot didn't exist and I was a really bad hunter. But then I remembered about the pictures that all of my grandparents have taken. I was like, Bigfoot has got to exist. But what if I'm doing it all wrong? What if Bigfoot is no longer hiding in the woods and Bigfoot is secretly hiding on the internet where everything else is hiding? And so I started typing in things into Google, searching for Bigfoot, typing in website names, and finally I found it. SasquatchOnly.com, the only dating site for Bigfoot. And so I've created a profile and I started chatting with a female Bigfoot. And it just turned out that I really believed that she was a female Bigfoot because she knew everything there was to know about Bigfoot. And so one day I decided I need to go and try and meet this female Bigfoot. And so I got the coordinates of where this Bigfoot lived because it's obvious that they're not going to give you an address if they're a real Bigfoot. And it happened to be up by Omaha, Nebraska. And that's about a 4-hour drive for me down here in Kansas. And so one morning I got in my car and I started off for Nebraska. Now, the closer I got, the more nervous I got because I realized I had not told the whole truth in my profile. You see, well, I'm obviously not a Bigfoot. I'm also not 8'7", and my shoe size is not a 23. So I knew that I might be in some trouble when I got up there. But I continued and I got all the way up to the coordinates. And well, I got up there and there she was. But it was a woman. It was not a Bigfoot. Yes, I was obviously disappointed, but I got out and I went up to talk to her and she said, well, didn't you bring your Bigfoot costume? I hadn't even thought about bringing a Bigfoot costume. She said, well, I brought one for you, and I brought some Kevlar too, because my last two dates didn't go so well. And so I put on the Kevlar, I put on the full Bigfoot costume, and we sat down for a picnic lunch. And we were starting to talk about all things Bigfoot. I mean, she knew everything there was to know. She knew what we would eat in the woods. She knew how we would build our house and everything. But then she started to scare me. You see, she started talking about how we were going to have to get implants of fur put all over our skin. And then when we had children, our children were going to have to get the fur implants, our great-grandchildren. But by the time it got up to our great-great-great-grandchildren, the genetic effect would have taken place and they would be born fully furred. And that's when I ran. I ran as fast as a person can run in a Bigfoot costume out to my car. And I got in my car and I stomped on it and I got out of there as fast as I could. But I was only a few miles away when I saw a deer laying on the side of the highway. Now, I'm not one that's beyond picking up a little roadkill on the side of the highway. So I stopped and I got out of my car and I walked around to that deer. And that deer was still warm and it was a cool day. And so I knew this was a good sign. This was a ready to pick up roadkill deer. Now, if you know me, my trunk is always full. And so I had to put this buck right in the passenger seat beside me. And so I got it all loaded up and I took off down the road again. But I was only a few more miles down the road when I looked beside me, and that deer was not dead. It came up and it head-butted me right in the head and forced me into the back seat where I passed out. And I'm not exactly sure how long I was passed out, but by the time I came to, there were two does back in the back seat with me. That deer that had kidnapped me in the front seat driving, and another buck in the other passenger front seat. And we were going off down the highway on interstate. And then they pulled over at Mahoney State Park, one of the best state parks in the state of Nebraska. And they drove up to a tree and they pulled me out of the car, tied me to the tree, put a note in my mouth. And it was about half an hour later that I had been reported to the Wildlife and Parks Department, and there were 4 officers coming in my direction. And there I am, still in a Bigfoot costume. I'm sure that they had never seen a Bigfoot tied to a tree before, with a note in its mouth. Well, I was able to move that note around in my mouth enough that I could say, I'm not a Bigfoot, I just have a costume on. And so they walked up to me and they took the note out and they read it. And it said, we, the deer of Nebraska, do hereby say that if deer hunting is not outlawed in the state of Nebraska, we will continue to kidnap people and tie them to trees randomly across the state. Well, I'm not exactly sure how this was worked out between the deer and the hunters, but I can say that I have not heard of another person being tied to a tree since then. But at Mahoney State Park that particular weekend, it just happened to be the Moonshell Storytelling Festival. And they just happened to be having a tall tale contest. And so I entered the contest and told them the true story that I just told you, and I won the contest. And that, my friends, is how I became a storyteller. Thank you.